When it comes to safety, I have to give this one a pretty high rating as well, and I'd give this one about an 8 out of 10. But now, let's get back to the garage. We'll pull out the Iron 883, give it a run, and we'll see what we can give it on its score. Alright, let's do this. The Iron 883 2013 year model, and love this bike, guys. Again, these are both great motorcycles, and the fact that I still have not gotten rid of this after buying my new motorcycle and not needing two motorcycles is testament to the fact of how much I love this motorcycle. I haven't even listed it for sale yet. I am trying to get up the ability to do that to make my wife happy. But the first thing I want to talk about on this one, like we done on the previous, on the Fat Bob, is the sound. And I definitely like the sound of my Fat Bob more with the short shots, but this one's stock. And again, we're comparing stock. So if you remember, previously on the Fat Bob, I gave it a 5 out of 10 on the stock sound for the motorcycle, that sewing machine sound that you get. Definitely have to upgrade your exhaust if you get a Fat Bob. This here is currently rocking the stock exhaust system, and I love it. I think it's great. I give it an 8 out of 10. It's I still think it's a good idea to upgrade your exhaust and intake on here, mainly to just let the motorcycle breathe better. You get a little more performance out of it. It's going to sound a little bit better, but straight stock, we'll see if we can take off here and let you hear it a little bit better, what it sounds like. Yeah, it's got a good sound to it. So yeah, definitely an 8 out of 10 on the sound on this motorcycle. If you're getting it stock and you don't want to have to put anything into the exhaust, you're not going to be missing out that much. That's why I never actually upgraded this stock. I loved it from the beginning, and I came from a motorcycle that didn't sound anywhere near as good as this. The Piaggio MP3 500 was a much more gutless machine and just didn't sound as cool. So when I got on this, I was like a kid in a candy shop, loving the way this thing sounded and felt and everything. So now again, we're getting on the highway here, which brings us to the highway ability. And I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, we gave it an 8 out of 10 on the Fat Bob. This is where the Sportsters definitely don't shine the most. And so straight off the bat, I give this motorcycle a 5 out of 10 as far as highway ability. Now I'm cruising along here at 60, 65, and right up until about 65, at about 60, 62, 63, it's no big deal at all. And it's really not a big deal after that. I wouldn't say it's a big deal, but you do, as I'm getting into 70 miles an hour now, I'm getting a little vibration through the pegs. And if I'm driving 30 minutes or so on a highway, it's not that big a deal, honestly. But if I was to take a trip for 8 hours with that vibration through the pegs, and not to mention the shocks being less enjoyable to ride on, it would not be as enjoyable of a bike to ride. Also, this is just a lighter bike, which is good in some ways, but when it comes to riding on the highway, you get flicked around a little bit more with the wind, so it's not quite as comfortable and solid of a ride on the highway. That being said, when I heard that, when I was looking into buying this motorcycle, it really almost turned me off to buying the Iron 883. And when you see that number of 5 out of 10, and maybe you have some highway on your commute, don't let that deter you. Again, if you're driving on a regular basis 30 minutes or less on the highway each day, I don't think it's going to make that much difference. And I wanted to get in towards the end of this video on some things you can do to the Iron if this is your preference of a bike. A small amount of modifications that you can do to this bike that can make it more enjoyable on places like the highway. So again, give it a 5 out of 10, but don't let that scare you off. It is a really cool bike for around town, and it does decent on the highway. Like, I'm not uncomfortable right now. If I was asked that same question here in about an hour, I would have a different story. My butt would be hurting. One thing well, I'll get into that more in the comfort. Let's get off the highway to where you can hear me a little better, and we'll talk about some of the other items on here. All right, so now that we're off the highway, let's talk a little bit about comfort. So that's one of the other areas that I think is the lowest rating you're going to get on the Iron, and that's for comfort. And I would give it a 5 out of 10 for comfort. Now, some of this depends on what your body type is. If you're a shorter person, you can adjust that number up a little bit. I am 5'11", and one of the first things that you'll notice if you get off of a larger bike like the Softails or the Dynas and onto a Sportster is you feel kind of funny when you first get back on. Just to keep it clear, I never noticed it until after I got the Fat Bob. Before I got the Fat Bob, nothing felt odd to me at all because it wasn't something that I had gotten used to on a larger bike. But on here, when you get right off of the Fat Bob and get onto the Iron 883, the first thing you notice is you feel like you look funny. You don't look funny, but you feel like you're kind of crouching because your legs are a lot more in a squat position compared to the Fat Bob. I'm basically on the Fat Bob sitting like I'm in a lazy boy, and that's where some of the comfort comes in for me. At being 5'11". If you were a 6'1" plus person, I feel like that might be kind of a deal breaker for you. I feel like 5'11", it's fine for me. It just feels weird right after coming off of the really comfortable Fat Bob, but it's not a big problem or anything. Just something that you should note. If you are 6'1", check it out yourself. I can't tell you for sure, but I do know for taller people, that right there could be the one and only deal breaker that I would say might keep someone from buying the Iron 883. But if you're shorter, it can actually be more preferential because you may not be able to flat foot on the Fat Bob or any of the other larger bikes. Whereas the Sportsters models, this one in particular, you ride really low to the ground. So, but comfort doesn't just entail that. The stock shocks and seat on the Iron 883 are pretty terrible, to be honest. And it's all about perspective. You know, when I first got this bike, this was such an upgrade to my previous bike as far as comfort went. So, you know, it was basically a scooter, what I was riding before. So it wasn't I felt like I was in luxury.
Luxury.
But now I've been spoiled to the Fat Bob on comfort, and so that's where it takes us down to an 8. I'm sorry, a 5 on this bike. But we'll talk more about modifications on that here in just a second. Next thing on the list is power. This is where I'd say this is maybe average or a little bit above average on power for a cruiser. It's one of the bottom on if you just look at specs. I believe this thing pulls around 50 horsepower and 50 foot-pounds of torque, which is, you know, for a motorcycle, it's plenty. Trust me. You don't feel, I've said this in every one of my videos that I've covered about the Iron 83. You never feel like you're wanting for power, like, oh man, I just can't quite go as fast as I want to. That being said, I don't ride as crazy as some people might choose to ride out on their motorcycles. So if you're wanting to go out and pop wheelies and you're wanting to do track days and stuff, this is not going to be enjoyable. But if you're just wanting to cruise, which is what most people want to do with cruisers, I think it's plenty of power. It's plenty of power on the highway. I definitely like the power on this motorcycle. It's going to be faster than a car, and like I believe it was SRK Cycles that was explaining it this way that I agreed with. He mentioned that on bikes that have less power, such as the Sportster models, a lot of it has to do with how it feels. In a car, if I had the same speed, it would feel good, but it feels even better when you're on a motorcycle. When you're exposed to the elements, it's like when you're on a go-kart. I think he mentioned, you know, you're on a go-kart that's an inch from the ground going 60 miles an hour, you're gonna feel like you're a speed demon. But you're driving in a, you know, Cadillac or a Mercedes at 60 miles an hour, it's gonna feel like sometimes like you're just going super slow. So it's all about perspective on that matter. But yeah, I mean, let's get on this here a second. And I love that sound, man. You can just hear the sound. Like, it's no slouch. It's not gonna scare you, and that's partly why this is a good motorcycle for people to start out on, is you can hardly give it too much gas that you're gonna hurt yourself. So that being said, power, I give it a 6 out of 10. There's definitely some room, some headroom there that could be adjusted if you wanted to upgrade to a 1200, or if you went and got the 1200 Sportster. I definitely think the 1200s are a little bit more oomph if you're wanting a Sportster line, but I'll tell you, I love the looks of the Iron 883. So next on the list is handling. Handling is where I'd say the Sportsters kind of shine for the price that you get these for, and that is, I would give it about an 8 out of 10. Still not as good as the Fat Bob, but I'd say it's as good or better than most of the other, probably better than a lot of the other Softail models. And that's just the fact that you've got a smaller, lighter bike in comparison, and you can throw this thing around just like I pointed out with the Fat Bob. I mean, it's pretty easy. It's actually easier on the Fat Bob for me to maneuver, which is one of the reasons I gave it a 10 out of 10. But like I said, compared to maybe like the Breakout or something like that, you're probably going to have a better time with handling this. It's just lighter. It's made for that. And I'm coming back up to this bumpy road again. After coming off of that Fat Bob, comfort level on this part of the road, it's not terrible. You know, I actually expected it to be worse on here, but you can definitely tell a difference when you're riding back to back on a bumpy road like this, coming from the really nice shocks on the Fat Bob down to the Sportster. But as far as handling goes, part of the reason why I didn't give this as high of a rating of the Fat Bob is I don't feel as confident in the turns. Now, this may be something different in the newer models. I have a 2013 again. I haven't driven the newer models, but as far as I know, the frame hasn't changed. I feel like the difference in the rigidity of the new Softail frames and the weight difference gives me more confidence in the turns, and it's probably due to the shocks too. Just all of that combined into one, I feel much more confident through the turns in my handling ability. I feel like I can push it further. This motorcycle here, I don't feel quite as confident, so I dropped my number down a little bit on the handling. If there are new modifications that they've made to the newer models that I don't know about, that might be something to look into. But yeah, I would give it an 8 out of 10, which is really good. Handling, I think you'll enjoy this, especially for riding around town. If you're doing some twisties, it's got that low end torque, even though the power is low. Again, the Harleys are good about that. You got the power where it's fun when you're just cruising around. Okay, next up is safety. Now, on safety, I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. And that's primarily because of, safety, I feel like takes a lot of the other features into effect here. Primarily, the handling and the power being less on this motorcycle, it kind of affects the safety, drops the number down a little bit. But also when comparing to the Fat Bob, for instance, you don't have anti-lock brakes and some of that technology. I'm not sure if on the newer models you can get it, but I am pretty sure that it's definitely not stock. You'd have to add it after the fact, and I don't know, I really don't know that you can. But again, we're comparing stock models here, and that's probably the biggest downfall and probably the number one concern when I have decided which motorcycle to keep and which one to get rid of, is coming down to safety. So again, the importance of analog brakes and that handling and that power all put together, I would give it a 6 out of 10. It's not bad. I'm not saying this is a dangerous motorcycle. I wouldn't have gotten it if I thought it was dangerous, but after having ridden the Fat Bob as much as I have and gotten used to that, the level of safety I feel is noticeable. When out on that motorcycle, I feel much more confident in a lot of different things that I do with that motorcycle, and so I definitely would give it a better rating. I don't think I'm going to get this light because I'm on a light little motorcycle, so we're going to have to do something that I don't like to do, but I will sit there all day if I don't take off. Okay, so that kind of takes us down to the end and final thoughts on this. So now each of those items can be weighted differently depending on your preferences on a motorcycle. Maybe safety is not as important to you because you don't ride a lot of miles, or maybe the power is not as important to you because you're a newer rider and you don't want, it's actually better for you to not have as much power. So take those independently from each other to see which one matches up with your needs. But there's definitely the one item that I'm not mentioning on the video, or I'm not saying my number, but I am going to comment down below and give you my subjective viewpoint on, and that's how good are the looks. What's the style rating of this motorcycle? I want to hear what you guys have to say, and I want other people to see what others think, because that's something that really I feel like is more of an item that you'd want to get from a conglomerate of different people. I'll tell you one thing though, my rating is very high on both of these motorcycles for the style and looks, and I think that's a very important part I want to reiterate. Now if you average all those numbers together, though, to take an overall look, what it came out to be was, I believe it was like an 8.1 was the average rating that I gave the Fat Bob, and a 6, like right at about a 6 for the Iron 883. Now at first you might think, well, man, that sounds terrible for the Iron 883. Well, if you watch some of my other videos about these, you'll notice that I don't feel that way. And the reason is a few different things. When you're just riding around town, for instance, again, the highway ability doesn't really make a difference. I don't really ride on the highway, so I don't really care about that portion of the rating. So to me, that part is kind of out the door. I'm not always out riding twisties. Normally, I'm just kind of cruising around town. So when you take the handling and the highway ability out of it, this is a really nice bike. And when you add in the looks to it, oh man, it's a sweet bike. Not to mention the cost, and that's the final thing I want to talk about here, is the cost. So the cost of the Fat Bob MSRP, and this is, you know, it's going to be a little bit different everywhere, so I'm take this, you know, give or take a few hundred, maybe $1,000, but you're talking MSRP for this bike right here is about $9 grand for the Iron 883, and for the Fat Bob it's about 18. It's about double. I think it's a little over 18,800 or something like that for the 114 engine. So you're talking half the price for a bike that is rated almost as good, in my opinion. You know, this is all my opinion, and I want to hear what you guys think too. But I feel like I have a pretty good perspective having owned this motorcycle, the Iron, for a little over 2 years, and I put a little over 1,000 miles on the Fat Bob, and I've owned it for, you know, like, I don't know, a few months, 3 months or so. So if you were to take the cost into effect, okay, so let's multiply the rating of the Fat Bob of 8.1 by 0.5, aka let's cut it in half because the price is twice as much. So if you're comparing apples to apples, you need to compare cost-wise. That would drop the Fat Bob down to around a 4.05 or so. So in that respect, when you're talking value, dollars per amount of enjoyment and fun, that's where the Iron 883 shines. For half the price, you can have almost as good of a bike. And I really think that the Iron is almost as good of a bike. So when it comes to, if you're looking highly at the value proposition between the two, the value is definitely here in the Iron 883. I've had a blast on this motorcycle, and if I was to do it over again, I would have done it the same way. I would have gotten the Iron first. I'm so glad I've got it, and I've had the experience of riding it. I mean, I've had it for almost 3 years. In November here, it's going to be 3 years that I've had this bike. So it's definitely been a great experience. But I want to know what you guys think. Tell me down below what you guys would like to rate each of these motorcycles. In particular, I want you to tell me the style. How would you rate the style?